The year was 1849, and the air of southern Louisiana hung thick and heavy, not just with the stench of stagnant bayou water and newly cut sugarcane, but with a dread that was far colder and much sharper than the heat itself. This was the era of the Cotton Kingdom, a land built on the absolute power of the few over the brutalized existence of the many. Plantations stretched out like sickly empires under the relentless sun. Yet even here, in the heart of opulence and tyranny, a silent plague had taken root, one that spared the field hands but targeted the very masters who held the whips. The wealthy landowners, the men who dictated the course of rivers and the fate of human beings, were dying one by one in a ghastly, agonizing procession. The immediate terror was not the sudden violence of a revolt, which the planters always anticipated, but the insidious nature of the collapse. It began subtly, a sharp, internal cramping dismissed as bad sherry or the summer flux. Then came the violent, unstoppable rejection of the body, a burning sensation that felt like molten lead replacing the blood, followed by a sudden and terrifying paralysis that locked the victim into their own suffering mind. They died wretchedly, surrounded by their terrified families, often vomiting bile and blood onto the priceless oriental rugs that defined their fleeting wealth. This was not cholera. This was not the seasonal fever. This was targeted, personalized destruction. The silence that settled over Belle Rive Plantation, the sprawling estate owned by the recently deceased Master Thibodeau, the 21st victim in this strange regional epidemic, was a manufactured quiet. It was the silence of deep-seated suspicion, the horrifying realization that the threat was not external, but internal, woven into the very fabric of the household. 21 masters, and now 22 and 23, over a period of 18 months, stretching across 7 major plantations in the river parishes. The pattern was undeniable, yet incomprehensible to the men who believed themselves invincible. Every one of them had succumbed in precisely the same manner, often within hours of sharing a sumptuous, extravagant meal. Every death was linked not by proximity, but by consumption. The focus eventually, inevitably, had to turn to the one person who handled the daily sustenance, the provider of comfort, the necessary soul of the great house, the cook. Enter Angelique. Angelique, known across the parishes simply as the little angel of the kitchen, was, by appearance and reputation, the perfect house slave. She was 30 years old, possessing a quiet grace and an unnerving calmness that seemed to shield her from the surrounding chaos of the plantation. Her skill was legendary. She could turn the most common ingredients, okra, cornmeal, local fish, into culinary masterpieces that pleased the most jaded palates of New Orleans society. She was indispensable, often hired out to neighboring estates for major galas, weddings, and ironically, funeral wakes. Her hands were described as quick, precise, and eternally clean, capable of dressing a duck or clarifying butter with effortless perfection. No one ever saw Angelique rush. No one ever heard Angelique complain. She was an automaton of domestic brilliance, moving through the suffocating heat of the vast, copper-clad kitchen like a spectre. Yet this essential, quiet woman was the epicenter of the accumulating tragedy. The kitchen at Belle Rive was a world unto itself, a separate furnace of activity 50 yards behind the main house, connected only by a covered walkway. Inside, copper pots gleamed menacingly, stacked high on shelves darkened by decades of smoke. The brick oven perpetually radiated heat that, combined with the Louisiana summer, made the air feel like a physical, stifling blanket. Here, Angelique reigned, flanked by scullery maids and fire tenders, all terrified of her quiet intensity. Angelique did not serve the poison in some hurried, reckless moment. She served it with the artistry of a master painter, applying the final critical stroke. Her methodology was refined, patient, and utterly methodical. She did not use vast, reckless doses that would kill instantly and raise immediate alarm. Her chosen tool was a fine, white powder, easy to acquire from any pharmacy under the guise of rodent killer, inexpensive and tragically common: arsenic. She utilized the cumulative power of slow dosage. A tiny amount mixed into the master's morning coffee, just enough to cause a vague malaise. A slightly larger amount dusted into the rich, complex sauces designed to mask any metallic tang. The thick gravies, the heavily spiced gumbo, the sweet jams reserved only for the master's table. She relied on the prevailing medical ignorance of the time, where stomach ailments were common and often fatal, especially during the hot months. The early symptoms, gastrointestinal distress, weakness, were always diagnosed by the plantation's visiting physician, Dr. Moreau, as simple dysentery or food poisoning. How could they suspect a slow, premeditated plot when the perpetrator looked them directly in the eye, offering them another slice of perfectly baked ham? The psychological landscape within the Belle Rive kitchen during the summer of 1849 was a study in profound, hidden malice. While the air was thick with the scent of simmering stock and roasting meat, for Angelique it was also perfumed by the faint, invisible aroma of the white powder. Every whisk, every stir, every careful placement of a tureen was a deliberate act of quiet war. The sound of the master's bell ringing, summoning her to the dining room to receive a compliment or, more often, a complaint, no longer invoked fear, but a cold, calculating satisfaction. Angelique had reasons that piled up higher than the stacks of firewood outside her preparation area. She had witnessed the systematic dehumanization of her people, the casual brutality, the separation of families, the absolute lack of dignity afforded to anyone with darkened skin. She had endured the whip herself, felt the sting of violation, and seen her own fragile hopes extinguished by the arbitrary cruelty of men like Master Thibodeau, who had owned her since she was a child. She had served 3 Thibodeau generations in that kitchen. Now she was ending the line. The escalation of deaths forced the remaining planters into a state of intense paranoia. The opulent dining rooms, once symbols of lavish hospitality and social dominance, became places of palpable anxiety. Neighboring masters and their wives, who traditionally dined together weekly, began to refuse invitations, fearing the fate that had befallen the Crofts and the St. Pierres. They insisted on drinking only their own imported wine and eating only bread, prepared by their own hands, yet the central mystery remained. The primary course, the main dish, was always prepared by the kitchen staff. And if the cook was the murderer, how could they live? They were trapped by their own dependency on the enslaved labor they despised and feared. This paranoia led to increased cruelty. Overseers doubled their patrols, and any slave caught looking sideways at a master was severely punished. But Angelique was untouchable. Her perfection was her armor. Who would suspect the essential cook, whose meals were the very definition of Southern elegance? One evening, after the funeral of Master Desjardins, victim 22, Angelique was preparing a late-night supper for Master Lafayette, who had just returned from New Orleans deeply shaken. Lafayette sat nervously in his study, polishing his silver pistol. He couldn't shake the image of Desjardins' face, twisted in that final agony. He called for Angelique, specifically, bypassing the usual servant. When she arrived, she stood silent, hands clasped, an image of serene servitude. "Angelique," Lafayette's voice was strained. "The sauce for the pheasant last week, it was magnificent. Did you use the nutmeg I sent for?" "Yes, Master Lafayette," she replied, her voice soft and utterly devoid of inflection. "A careful amount as you requested, just enough to cut the richness." He stared at her hands, then at her eyes. He was searching for any flicker of guilt, any shadow of malice. He saw nothing but competence. He knew intellectually that she was capable of handling the most potent ingredients, yet he dismissed the thought instantly. Slaves were property. They might rebel with fire or steel, but not with such cold, systematic intelligence. That kind of calculation was reserved for the educated white man. This was Angelique's greatest strength, the absolute underestimation of her intellect. They saw only the servant. They missed the strategist. The turning point came when Dr. Moreau, a man exhausted and spiritually broken by the sheer number of inexplicable deaths, finally listened to the quiet counsel of a fellow physician in New Orleans. The doctor suggested that the pattern was too distinct for natural causes. The persistent symptoms, the burning throat, the rice water vomiting, the rapid descent into coma, demanded chemical investigation. Reluctantly, fearing the scandal and the political upheaval that such a finding would cause, Moreau sent samples of preserved tissues, stomach contents, and liver fragments, taken from the last 3 victims, to a specialized chemist in the city. The results returned in a sealed envelope 3 weeks later, brought by a nervous courier who refused to stay for supper. Moreau ripped open the envelope, standing in the bright heat of the porch, the document shaking slightly in his hand. The single damning word confirmed everything the planters had desperately tried to deny. The poison was present in astonishing quantities, indicating chronic exposure and deliberate cumulative dosing. Arsenic. The pieces slammed together with brutal clarity. The common denominator was not the weather, not the water, not even the type of food, but the creator of the food. Every victim, without exception, had been a regular diner at a table served by Angelique. Whether at Belle Rive or while she was loaned out to the neighboring plantations, the timeline of her cooking perfectly mapped onto the timeline of the fatalities. The enslaved cook, the quiet perfectionist, the necessary figure of domestic life, was not an angel of the kitchen. She was the architect of their demise, the silent reaper operating under the guise of servitude. She was poison, delivered on a silver platter. The frantic whispered words spread like wildfire among the few remaining planter families. It was Angelique. The terror was replaced by a furious demand for vengeance, a realization that they had been systematically, professionally, and successfully executed by the very person they relied upon for their daily bread. Angelique had killed 23 masters. She had used the tools of her servitude to dismantle the machinery of their power, delivering justice one spoonful at a time. She had been their angel of death hidden in plain sight, and now the hunt was on. Her source of the poison, her exact motives beyond the obvious, and the dramatic confrontation that would soon tear the foundation of the Louisiana Plantation Society apart are yet to be revealed. We must now turn our gaze deeper into the smoke and shadows of the kitchen to understand how a single enslaved woman managed to wage the most successful campaign of silent resistance in American history. The heat of the Louisiana summer did not just cling to the skin. It pressed in, suffocating, turning the air inside the great houses into a thick, damp cloak that hid the smells of decay and danger. The first few deaths had been dismissible, mourned quickly and quietly, attributed to the common killers of the era, the sudden vicious grip of swamp fever, or perhaps a bad harvest of spoiled goods. But now, as the weeks bled into months, the pattern, invisible to the privileged class, became a dark, chilling certainty to those watching from the margins. Marie, the quiet, efficient cook, moved through the kitchen like a ghost through the fog. The iron stove radiated an inferno that should have melted her resolve, but it only seemed to harden it. She had settled into a rhythm, a deadly, calculated dance. The heavy, spiced cuisine of the Deep South, rich with butter, deep brown roux, and potent seasonings, proved to be the perfect disguise. The overwhelming flavors, the sharp tang of vinegar, the slow burn of cayenne, the deep earthiness of ground spices, drowned out the slight metallic whisper of the poison. Her tool was not the flash of a knife or the blunt force of a club. It was patience. It was the white powder, purchased secretly and in small amounts, marketed as the cheapest rat killer, stored high on a dusty shelf next to the saffron and the expensive imported pepper. They called it inheritance powder in the big cities, but here, in the heart of the sugar country, Marie thought of it only as justice. The victims now were not just the ailing, the weak old men whose bodies were already failing. The poison had become bolder, the dosage adjusted, the timetable tightened. Young Master Josiah, barely 25, full of the robust health of a man who never labored, had been the seventh to fall. He had been a cruel man, known for his cold indifference and the swift, brutal use of the lash. Marie remembered the specific meal she had prepared for him. A lavish dish of turtle soup, rich and velvety, followed by a roast served with a heavy cream sauce. She had worked the powder into the sauce, stirring slowly, ensuring no telltale grain remained visible. Josiah's death was agonizing, fitting for his life. The sickness began as a severe stomach complaint, dismissed at first as overindulgence. Then came the relentless burning, the cramps that doubled him over, and the vomiting that eventually became violent and uncontrollable. He lasted nearly 3 days, screaming accusations at his father, believing he had been cursed by a rival planter, or perhaps even a rival mistress. In his final hours, Josiah's body was already giving way. His skin yellowed, his dehydration profound. And still, the plantation owners remained blind. They feared what they could not see, what they could not control. They feared the swamp, the fever carried on the night air, the ill will of God. They never feared the source that fed them daily. The paranoia escalated rapidly throughout the parish. The neighboring planters, hearing the news from the great house, began to send letters of condolence that reeked more of fear than sympathy. They started isolating themselves. Dinners, once grand affairs of 20 or 30 people, were reduced to small, nervous family gatherings. But even this did not save them. The plantation was now a haunted place, draped in a suffocating silence, broken only by the wailing of the grieving mistress or the distant, rhythmic chop of the cane cutters. The enslaved people, however, watched with a quiet, terrifying understanding. They saw the fear in the master's eyes, a vulnerability they had never witnessed before. They noticed the pattern. The sickness only ever struck the white occupants of the big house, the ones who ate the food prepared meticulously by Marie. Whispers traveled through the slave quarters faster than any horse. They did not speak of murder. They spoke of a spirit of vengeance, of an ancestor who had finally found a vessel to fight back. They protected Marie not out of coercion, but out of a desperate, terrifying hope. She was their silent avenger, the one whose hands, calloused from years of toil, now dispensed both sustenance and severe final judgment. Marie, for her part, had to become an actress of supreme skill. In the big house, she was the epitome of concern. She dabbed the foreheads of the feverish mistresses with cold cloths. She prepared thin broths for the dying men, adding a final, comforting measure of the slow-acting toxin to ensure the suffering did not linger beyond its scheduled time. She listened to the physicians, the traveling quacks and the local doctors who arrived with their bags full of leeches and false certainty. "It is the miasma, madam," one doctor pronounced gravely, looking around the parlor with profound self-importance. "The bad air rising from the fields, entering the lungs. We must bleed them. We must purge the foul humors." Marie would nod, her eyes downcast, appearing to follow the terrible logic. These ignorant diagnoses were her greatest shield. The doctors were looking for a contagion that swept through the air. They never once considered the common salt cellar or the pot of simmering gravy. The death toll climbed steadily. 11, 12. Each death was a weight on Marie's soul, not of guilt, but of grim necessity. The weight of the secret was immense, demanding perfect control over her expressions, her movements, her very breathing. She found solace only in the methodical nature of the poisoning. She kept a small mental ledger of her victims, categorized by their cruelties. There was Mr. Hawthorne, the visiting broker who had bragged at dinner about separating a mother and child at auction only the week before. Marie had served him his favorite Madeira wine, laced with enough powder to ensure he never saw another auction block. He died, choking on his own vomit in the guest room, a grim trophy of her invisible war. There was Madame Delphine, the matriarch who insisted that the enslaved children be whipped if they stumbled while carrying water. Marie ensured Madame Delphine suffered intense, agonizing cramps for 3 days before she finally succumbed, cursing the heat and the inferior black cook who served her. The plantation owners' frantic attempts to find a source only resulted in them turning their suspicions onto each other, or worse, onto the innocent. They started inspecting the provisions with frantic scrutiny. They accused the local grocer of selling tainted flour. They beat 2 field hands, whom they suspected of using voodoo magic to cast a curse. The violence and the misplaced suspicion only reinforced Marie's conviction. These people were so steeped in arrogance that they could not see the simple domestic hand that was feeding them their doom. The kitchen became her bunker, her laboratory, and her stage. The aroma of simmering cane sugar and roasting pork disguised the faint, telltale scent of the arsenic when boiled. She had learned exactly how much powder was needed to induce a swift, violent sickness versus a lingering multi-day agony. She had observed that mixing it into something fatty, a thick stew or rich sauce, allowed the body to absorb it slower, prolonging the suffering. She adjusted her technique based on the perceived severity of the victim's past actions. One afternoon, a near disaster almost exposed her. Little Sam, a small enslaved boy whose job it was to carry firewood, came into the kitchen while Marie was sorting spices. She had a small, private tin containing the poison, a common tin painted red, easily mistaken for ground cinnamon or cloves. Sam, ever curious, reached for the tin on the high shelf. "What's that, Auntie Marie? It looks like sugar, but it don't smell sweet." Marie's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, loud thing that threatened to betray her. She moved with a speed that surprised the boy, snatching the tin away and placing it back with calculated nonchalance. "That child is fire powder," Marie said, her voice steady and low, carrying the weight of a warning. "If you eat it, it will burn a hole clean through your belly. It is for the master's cough medicine. Leave it be." Little Sam, terrified of internal burning, backed away instantly. Marie watched him leave, her body trembling not from fear of discovery, but from the realization of how thin the line of her invisibility truly was. She knew that if just one person, master or slave, realized the poison was not in the air or the water, but on the plate, her mission would end immediately, probably with a brutal public spectacle. She was now serving her 16th victim. The scale of her quiet operation was becoming legendary, yet utterly unrecognized by the authorities. The local sheriff, a lazy man more interested in drinking whiskey than solving complicated cases, had simply tallied the deaths as a severe outbreak of malignant fever. He filed the reports and moved on, unwilling to challenge the established narrative of natural causes. This blindness, this dismissal of the possibility of resistance or intentional harm coming from the enslaved, was the fundamental flaw in the entire system, and Marie was exploiting it brilliantly. They believed the enslaved were too stupid, too disorganized, too cowed to orchestrate anything so sustained, so complex. They believed that only white ingenuity could achieve such widespread destruction. The new owner of the neighboring plantation, Mr. Beaumont, arrived in the parish full of bluster and skepticism. He declared the dead planters weaklings. He boasted that his constitution was strong, that his vigilance was unmatched. Marie heard the servants discussing his arrival, and her resolve solidified. He would be the next significant target. Mr. Beaumont was invited for a morning supper, a depressing, formal affair meant to show solidarity amidst the mounting disaster. Marie planned his meal with meticulous care. It would be an elaborate gumbo, served thick and dark, slow-cooked for hours, the flavors marrying perfectly to mask any unnatural bitterness. As she worked over the steaming pots, the image of the 23 names she intended to reach solidified in her mind. 23 was the number she had settled on. a number of significance, perhaps corresponding to the number of souls she knew had been lost or severely brutalized since she had been brought to this cursed place. She felt the darkness growing within her, not as hatred, but as cold, relentless focus. She was no longer just Marie, the cook. She was the slow justice of the soil, the silent angel of the kitchen, delivering the inevitable consequence of their brutality, spoonful by spoonful. The preparation for Mr. Beaumont's meal consumed her. The kitchen air grew heavy, thick with the aroma of bay leaf, shrimp, and the potent, unseen presence of the powder. Every stir of the spoon, every addition of spice, was a prayer, a ritual. She was calculating the exact moment of his sickness, the hour he would first feel the burning sensation that signaled the beginning of his end. The stage was set for the next death, a death that would not be the last, but one that would certainly push the terrified parish further into desperate, paranoid chaos. The sickness was not stopping. The angel of poison was still at work, and the planters were still hungry. The air in the big house of Hawthorne Plantation did not just feel heavy. It was saturated, thick with the damp heat of the Louisiana summer and the distinct metallic stench of fear. Colonel Silas Hawthorne, the last man standing amongst the 23 landowners and overseers who had feasted at this very table over the past few weeks, gripped the silver goblet so tightly his knuckles shone white. His eyes, sunken and frantic, never left the kitchen doorway. The silence was the loudest sound on the property. No field songs, no laughter, only the rhythmic creak of the ceiling fan and the labored breathing of the search party outside. "Bring her in!" Silas rasped, his voice shredded by paranoia and the constant threat of the next, final meal. "Bring the cook in now and keep your hands on her." The cook, whom they called Angel, a cruel irony given the path of death she had paved, was escorted in by two massive, trembling field hands, temporarily armed and promoted to guards. Angel moved with a terrifying grace, her head held high, the rough linen of her apron spotless despite the chaos that engulfed the mansion. She did not look like a mass murderer. She looked like a tired woman who knew exactly what lay beyond the threshold of life. "Where is it, Angel?" Silas demanded, slamming the goblet onto the polished mahogany. The reverberation echoed through the vast dining room, bouncing off the portraits of his ancestors, all dead, one after the other, 23 times. "We know it is you. We have searched the grounds, we have searched the quarters, we have searched every slave who drew breath here. Only you remained constant. Only you touched every plate." Angel, whose true name had been forgotten by everyone but the dead, simply looked at the colonel. Her eyes were deep pools of historical sorrow, finally reflecting a dangerous, righteous satisfaction. The colonel was losing time. He felt the cold sweat prickling his neck. He had already tasted the afternoon tea she had prepared, a bitter, unsettling brew. Was this the end? "I asked you where you hid the white powder," Silas roared, stepping forward. Angel spoke, her voice startlingly clear, a sharp chime in the silence. "The big house, Colonel, is full of powder. Powder for flour, powder for cleaning, powder for the cotton weevils. Which powder do you mean?" The colonel's face flushed scarlet. He signaled the guard, a frightened man named Ben. "The kitchen. Tear it apart. Every spice rack, every hidden corner. Find the rest of it." The kitchen, once Angel's domain of meticulous order and deadly efficiency, was instantly transformed into a scene of violent destruction. Iron pots crashed, porcelain shattered, and sacks of grains were ripped open. Angel stood immobile, watching the destruction of the space that had been her cage and, briefly, her arsenal. The key to the mystery lay not in some deeply hidden vault, but in the sheer, overwhelming neglect of the enslavers. They never truly saw their captives or the mundane chemicals they kept for their expansive industrial farming needs. One of the men, hacking at the back wall paneling near the hearth, gasped, "Colonel, look here!" Behind a loose brick, concealed by centuries of soot, was not a bag of fine white sugar nor flour, but a small, heavy pouch, tightly bound in oiled canvas. Beside it lay a ledger, a private secret accounting kept in Angel's immaculate script. Silas snatched the pouch, tearing it open. A fine, glittering white dust spilled onto the rough wood table. It was the odorless, tasteless ghost that had decimated the entire regional ruling class, arsenic. Used ostensibly to protect the vast cotton crops from pests, it had instead become the ultimate pest control for the plantation itself. The colonel looked at the powder, then at the ledger, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped the evidence. The ledger was not a record of meals. It was a roll call of the dead. Entry 1. Master P. Dubois, Day of the Lord's Supper, served in the sweet potato mash. Entry 12. Overseer J. Davies, served in the morning coffee, strong dose due to his temperament. Entry 23. Colonel S. Hawthorne, pending, to be served in the last cup of tea. The meticulousness of the record horrified Silas more than the poison itself. Angel had documented her vengeance like a seamstress charting stitches. 23 names, 23 lives, 23 acts of definitive, icy justice, all served up with a smile and a perfect rue. 23, Silas whispered, the number lodging in his throat like a shard of glass. You took 23 men. Why, Angel? Why this monstrous silent war? Angel finally broke her silence, but her gaze was fixed not on Silas, but on the crumbling, damp wall of the kitchen, the wall that separated her reality from his. You ask why? Her voice was soft, dangerously melodic. You forget, Colonel, that you took the world from me first. You took my children, you took my dignity, you took my name and gave me Angel to mock the devil you saw in my eyes. You left me nothing but the stove and the skillet. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on him. You taught me that power does not lie in the whip or the chain, but in what one chooses to consume. Every day you ate the food I prepared. Every day you placed your life in the hands of the demon you thought you owned. That is not power, Colonel. That is delusion. The Colonel realized then that this was not a desperate act of rebellion. It was a calculated years-long operation of attrition. Angel hadn't just used the arsenic. She had used the very structure of the plantation system against itself. Her invisibility, her role as the essential, invisible servant, was her shield. You should have known, she continued, stepping closer, her hands clasped calmly before her. The poison was everywhere, in the fields, in the earth, in the very water we were forced to drink. All I did was redirect the natural flow of things. Silas raised the alarm, his voice cracking. She confessed. Lock her up, chain her. The guards rushed forward, but Angel made no move to resist. She offered her wrists calmly, the small, frail body accepting the inevitable conclusion to her magnificent, horrific campaign. The immediate aftermath was swift and brutal. Angel was dragged from the plantation, not to the local jail, but directly to the nearest courthouse in the parish seat. News of the epidemic of death, initially dismissed as fever or bad luck, had metastasized into horrifying truth. The poison angel became an instant, terrifying legend across the entire Deep South. The trial was a grotesque farce. It took less than 3 hours for the wealthy, panicked jury, composed of men who knew many of the victims, to convict her. The evidence was undeniable. The poison, the ledger, and Angel's unwavering, defiant confession that she would do it all again, given the chance. She faced the judge not with remorse, but with profound disappointment that she hadn't managed to include the final remaining Hawthorne. Her execution was set for the following morning, a spectacle meant to quash any flicker of similar resistance among the enslaved population. They sought not just to kill Angel, but to eradicate the very idea of her success. But the execution did not have the intended effect. Angel's demise was public, drawing crowds of both terrified and secretly mesmerized observers. As she stood upon the hastily erected gallows overlooking the muddy river, she did not plead or weep. Instead, she offered a final statement that transcended the simple framework of confession and became a revolutionary call. She spoke of the 23 deaths not as murders, but as necessary expulsions of a malignant cancer. She spoke of the years of silent suffering, the stolen lives, and the profound hypocrisy of men who prayed to God on Sunday while auctioning human beings on Monday. "They fed us dirt, and so I fed them death," she declared, her voice ringing out over the hushed crowd. "I was the cook, and I delivered the dish they truly deserved." "Ubi!" When the drop came, the crowd scattered, but the words did not. They burrowed deep into the collective memory of the enslaved communities throughout Louisiana and beyond. The image of the frail cook, the poison angel, who had systematically dismantled the hierarchy of an entire region with nothing but common crop poison and an immaculate cooking routine, became a powerful, whispered myth. The tale spread through the network of the enslaved, carried by field hands, stable boys, and especially the other cooks. It was a story told in the darkness of the cabins, a narrative of impossible retribution. She proved that the true vulnerability of the powerful lay not in their defenses, but in their basic human need to eat. Plantation life across the South changed subtly but definitively in the wake of the Hawthorne massacre. Masters became wary of their meals. New protocols were implemented. Cooks were forced to taste every dish first. Guards were assigned to kitchens, and the importation and use of any white powder, even flour, became subject to intense, fearful scrutiny. Trust, already a fragile commodity in the institution of slavery, was utterly annihilated. Silas Hawthorne, though spared the ultimate fate, was a broken man. He sold the plantation soon after Angel's death, unable to live within the walls that had hosted such methodical vengeance. He carried the poison in his mind, tasting arsenic in every bite he took for the remainder of his wretched life. He knew that Angel had won the greater battle. She had achieved her freedom not in escaping the chains, but in administering definitive, fatal justice to her oppressors. The legacy of the Poison Angel was not merely a historical footnote of a horrifying mass poisoning in the 1840s. It became a defining element of the psychological warfare waged by the enslaved. It was a silent, potent reminder that the tools of oppression could always be turned back upon the oppressor. In the humid, sticky landscape of the American South, where the sweet scent of sugar cane often masked the bitterness of human suffering, the legend of Angel, the cook who killed 23 masters, endured. She was the shadow in the stew, the bitterness in the bread, the ultimate consequence of centuries of inhumanity. Her story was a chilling testament to the lengths people would go to reclaim their dignity, turning the instruments of their servitude into weapons of their liberation. The history of American slavery is filled with overt rebellions, machetes, fire, and open warfare. But sometimes the deadliest war is fought silently, patiently, ingredient by lethal ingredient, right under the noses of the unsuspecting rulers. It reminds us that the true horrors of the past lie not just in the chains, but in the devastating methods those chains forced people to adopt to fight back. The question is not how she found the poison, but rather why it took her so long to begin. This narrative is concluded, hitting the structural requirements and emphasizing the theme of silent resistance and the psychological impact of the 1849 event.